All right, so we are now going to turn to a special privilege of the evening, an introduction of the late icon of political reporting, Tom Crawford, into the Sanford Circle. The Sanford Circle is named for Stedman Sanford, who founded the study of journalism at the University of Georgia. It was created to honor late champions of Grady, whose dedication, achievement, and inspiration still remains with us. Called the Dean of the State Capitol Press, Tom was the voice of Georgia politics, founder and editor of the Georgia Reporter. He shared news that brought Georgians everywhere into the political conversation. And to Tom's family and friends, we want to thank you for being here with us tonight. To Georgians everywhere, please be assured that Grady is preparing students to follow Tom under the Gold Dome. Joining me right now to salute the memory of Tom Crawford is Grady Fellow Charlie Hazlett. Please welcome him as he comes.
One night late one afternoon, early evening, and one day in I think it was 1975, I was working at the Atlanta Journal, and my buddy Cliff Green and I were getting ready to leave. We had done all the damage we could do. The Journal was the afternoon paper, and most of the work was done earlier. And the newsroom was deserted, except for one guy who was at the other end of the newsroom, pounding away on an old IBM Selectric typewriter, which were new at the time. But and we just looked around and decided that it would be rude to leave him there by himself. So we went back, and we barely knew him, and asked him what he was doing, and he told us. And veterans that we were, we convinced him that the right career move would be to abandon the story and come with us to the Kimball House Saloon to drink a little whiskey and see what other kind of mischief we could get into. And that was really the beginning of a nearly 50-year friendship and professional relationship with Tom Crawford. He and I worked together at the Atlanta Journal in the 70s. In the 1980s, we reconnected at Bell South, where Dick Yarborough, I know he's here somewhere, in an egregious lapse of judgment, hired both of us. In the 1990s, I had established a public relations firm, and I hired Tom there. And then in around 2000 or 2001, I got involved in bootstrapping a little company that was designed to serve the political and governmental community in Georgia, state capital primarily. And one of the things we wanted to do was offer an editorial product, sort of an insider view of what was going on, more detail than most media would provide. And I talked Tom into, who had covered the Capitol back in our Journal days, into moving over from the PR firm to this new little company. I was never really sure that that was a great thing for him to do career-wise, but he turned it into a real career. And what started out there, with that company, he morphed into the Georgia Report as a standalone business. In addition to to the Georgia Report, Tom over time began writing weekly columns for about 30 papers in Georgia. And when he passed away last fall, I heard from two of the editors in particular about what a loss that was, because with the troubles that most journalism, most newspapers have had over the last decade or so, especially, their sources of state news had dried up. Robert Williams down in Blackshear said Tom was the only guy we had who was providing information on what was going on at the state capitol. Pete McCommons here in Athens told me something very similar. So it was a huge loss. Professionally, Tom was remarkable in more ways than I can list tonight. He was blessed with one of the most amazing intellects I ever encountered. He really had something approaching a photographic memory. He could perform complex math problems in his head, usually before I could find my calculator and punch in the necessary numbers. You knew it was a hard one for him when he had to close his eyes and kind of lean his head back and think about it. And he didn't have to do that very often. I truly wondered at times if he might be a bona fide genius. And it turns out that he sort of was. Tom was not one to toot his own horn, but as I was helping him with his obit toward the end of his days, he finally admitted he had been a member of Mensa for decades. He was a voracious reader, especially of history, and he remembered it all. He could apply lessons from the past to the present, and he would have made, frankly, a terrific teacher. It's a shame he never got a shot at doing that. As a writer, he was hands down the most versatile one I ever met or worked with. He could spit out a breaking news story at speed of light and then switch gears without even breathing hard and write a human interest feature that would make you laugh or cry or both. During our Bell South days together, I was the senior corporate speechwriter for a good part of that and was regarded as being pretty good at the craft. Tom was better. He was always the guy I wanted editing my copy. He was just amazing. When we worked together in my public relations firm, if we were dealing with a difficult issue for a client, he was the guy I wanted in the room with me, and he was always the last guy I wanted to listen to before we had to make a decision. But most of all, he was my good and great friend, maybe the best I ever had, and I was privileged to be his. We went through a lot together, and there was never a surer friend than Tom Crawford. His members of his family are here tonight. A couple of other professional colleagues, Greg Bluestein is over from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Susan Percy, who edited Tom's column at Georgia Trend when he was writing that. I think she would tell you that was probably one of the easiest tasks that she ever had. But I am, this recognition for Tom is much deserved. I'm honored to be here to acknowledge it on his behalf. And I wish that he could be here to do it. And I'll add one thing. In terms of sort of belated recognition, actually I'll go back to one quick story. Like a lot of journalists here in Georgia, Tom got his start at the Red and Black. I think he started out as a sports writer, but he moved to the editorial page and ran and was the editorial page editor. And that was an era when, I mean, the paper still is, but was independent at the time. And Tom, on the occasion of Senator Richard Russell's death, Tom wrote a pretty unflattering column about the senator's attitudes on race. I've forgotten the headline, but it got a lot of attention. One of the places that it got attention was the president's office here on campus. The editor of the Red and Black at the time, a guy named Robert Friedman, was invited for a meeting at the president's office, and where he was informed that things needed to change at the Red and Black, and he would be watching closely, and if they didn't change their ways, David told Friedman supposedly that neither he nor Tom would ever work in Georgia journalism. Robert went back. They kept doing things the way they had been doing them and survived. It does bear mentioning that Robert Friedman did his entire career in newspapers in Florida, and that Tom had to leave the state to get his first job at the Montgomery Advertiser, but fortunately was able to sneak back in. Flash forward a half century, and as Tom was working at the Capitol and been there 15 years and established his relationship, he was approached by the special collections people over here at the Russell Library about collecting all of his papers and curating them for the public to inspect as they saw fit or needed to. And it seems just that old Red and Black column will be among those papers that are now on display at the Russell Library, but in a form of recognition as well along with this. And again, thank you for the chance to be here. He was a great man and a great journalist, and I miss him. So, thank you.